Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mir Hashem today we will be learning Daf Samach Aleph Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Shabbos, and we pick up today on Daf Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. Bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Pei Beis Sif Dalid. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanisunim Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamakayim Yerachem Alehem Ve'yitziim Yitzara L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira U'Mishibad L'Geula Hashta Bagala Uvizman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for Tzvi ben Leah Miriam, for Daniel ben Naomi, and it should be a schus for Yisrael ben Rachel, Yonasan ben Michal, and Yoel ben Michal. The Rebbe should watch over them and protect them, together with our others, brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. B'chal makom shehem. So, we've been learning the very interesting halachas here about Kriyas HaTorah on Shabbos. I always find it very fascinating to learn these halachas, to give shiurim on these halachas, because these are things that we interact with on a constant basis, right? We go to shul every week, and we see the format of the Kriyas HaTorah, and it's so much different and so much more meaningful when you actually know what's behind everything and what goes into everything. So we pick up here Reish Pei Beis Sif Daled. We actually read the beginning of the Mechaber, and we did Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Ches, which was its own separate little topic. That's why I chose to do Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Ches at the end of the previous year. But I'm going to read the Mechaber over again and then proceed to Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Tes. Says the Mechaber, bottom line, Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. Noihagim, the minig is Likrois Shiva. We call up 7 oilim. We make 7 aliyas. V'ligmar imahem haparsha. We break up the entire parsha of the week, and we lane the complete parsha with those 7 oilim. V'omer kaddish, and then we say kaddish. V'chayzer v'korei im hamaftir mashakara hashvi. Then we call up somebody for maftir, and that person is going to lane, or the Balkara is going to lane, at least part of what was laned for the 7th aliyah, of what was laned for Shvi. So again, we know that on Shabbos you have to have 7 oilim. That was how we started off this Siman. Maitzi and Sevater v'karim by Shiva. On Shabbos we have to have 7 aliyahs. Says the Mechaber over here, the format of the laning is, we call up the 7 aliyahs, we lane the entire parsha between those 7 aliyahs, then we say Chatzi Kaddish, then we call up an 8th aliyah, then we call up the maftir. What's the maftir going to lane, or what's the Balkari going to lane for maftir? He's going to repeat part of what was laned for the 7th aliyah. Now, of course, the maftir, after this laning is over and after Hagbid Galila, the maftir is also going to make the brachas over the HaTorah and perhaps lane the HaTorah, which is why his aliyah is referred to as maftir. Now, before we go into Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Tes, we need to understand the background of maftir and HaTorah. Me'ikar adin, we should only be laning on Shabbos from a Sefer Torah. And Me'ikar adin, we should only have 7 aliyahs. Where does it come from that we also lane from Navi and we have an 8th aliyah? Where does that come from? So, back in the day, there was a time when the locality or the kingdom that Klal Yisrael found themselves under, they passed a gzera, and they did not allow the Yidden to lane from a Sefer Torah. No more laning from a Torah. Now, they didn't want to be mevatel Kriyas HaTorah. So instead of being mevatel Kriyas HaTorah, what they did was they laned from Navi. The government's not laning us lane from the Torah, so we'll lane from Nach. And they made a Kriya out of Nach. And they did it with 7 aliyahs. They called up 7 aliyahs, and they made brachas, and they made a Kriyas HaTorah from Nach. Baruch Hashem, that gezerah became bottle, and the people who made that gezerah are, part of the pile of the dustbin of history, and Baruch Hashem, we're still here. So that gezerah was bottle. Really, when that gezerah was bottle, they could have gone back to the way things were before. 7 aliyahs in the Torah. But they didn't do that. Once we had that time period where we laned from the Navi, they weren't mevatel that in its entirety. And what they decided was that from then going forward, we're always going to lane something from Navi. Okay, so really what could have been was 7 aliyahs in the Torah, like it was before, and then call up somebody and let him lane from the Navi. So you would have had 7 aliyahs in the Sefer Torah, and then you would have another aliyah. This week is Parshas, I'm recording this Erev Shabbos, Parshas Chayei Sarah. So you would have, this week is in Melachim, the HaTorah. So you would call up an 8th person, and that 8th person would lane from Sefer Melachim, from Navi. But Chazal didn't want to do that. Why? Because if we have 7 aliyahs in the Torah, and then we have an aliyah from Navi, there doesn't seem to be any difference between the aliyahs in the Torah and the aliyah in the Navi. In that case, it looks like we're equating Navi with Torah. And that we don't do. The Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, is of a higher Kedusha than the Navi is. So in order to rectify that, what they decided was, the one who gets maftir, the one who's going to lane from the HaTorah, also has to lane psukim from the Torah. So everybody lanes from the Torah. The maftir lanes from the Torah and from the Navi. Okay, so we've now established that we're going to have a certain amount of aliyahs just from the Torah. We're going to have one aliyah that's going to be from the Torah and from the Navi. Now came up a question. This last oilah, the one who's going to lane from the Torah and from the Navi, could he be from the 7 oilim, or maybe not? And this was a machlokes amaroim in the Gemara. What was behind the machlokes? Well, there were those shittas that said that the maftir cannot count towards the 7 main aliyahs. Why? Because really, the only reason the maftir is laning any psukim from the Torah at all is for kavanat Torah purposes, right? Remember what we said. Really, we could have had a separate oilah who would lane only from the Navi, to be Mekayim the minig of laning from the Navi. But we said we can't do that because that's a pagam in the kavanat Torah, because it looks like the Torah and the Navi are the same. So Memela, we said that he has to lane psukim from Chumash also. But reasons, these Amoraim in the Gemara, that means that the only reason the maftir is laning psukim from the Torah is for kavanat Torah, not really for the chiyuv of Kriyas HaTorah. Everybody else is laning psukim from the Torah as part of the chiyuv of Kriyas HaTorah. This fellow is laning psukim from the Torah only because of kavanat Torah. Therefore, that aliyah should not count towards the 7 critical aliyahs that we must have on Shabbos. In order to be choshish for that opinion in the Gemara, we paskid lahalacha that we call up 7 aliyahs. Those 7 aliyahs only lane from the Torah. Then we call up an 8th oilah. That one is going to lane from the Torah and from the Navi. All right. Now, also what we decided is that the 7 original aliyahs, we're going to complete the entire parsha, because that's really the kriya of today. The kriya of Shabbos is the parsha of the week. So we're going to complete the entire parsha of the week with those 7 aliyahs. Then we're going to say Kaddish, and then we're going to go call up the 8th oilah, who's going to lane some psukim and the Navi after Kaddish. So there's a very clear distinction between the 7 oilim and the 8th oilah of maftir. You have 7 that complete the parsha of the week. Then you have Kaddish, because we finished the parsha, so we finished the entire chiyuv of Kriyas HaTorah, so now it passes to have Kaddish. Now we have Kaddish. And then we call up the 8th oilah, who's going to lane psukim and the Navi to be mekayim the minig of HaTorah. Now, what psukim should he lane? We already finished the parsha. So the psukim that he lanes are a repeat of part of the 7th aliyah. They're a repeat of at least part of Shvi. So now we understand the format of our laning on Shabbos. Now we can see the Mishnah Berurah is cutting you a test. Likroi Shiva explains the Chavetz Chaim. Dihinei min adin, really me ikar adin, kaimalod, we paskin, the mafter oila leminyan shiva. We really paskin like the shita in the Gemara that holds that the maftir can count as one of the 7 aliyahs. V'hayayachol ligmar aparsha, dahainu asedra ima maftir shuhu hashvi. Really, me ikar adin, what we could do is, we could call up 7 aliyahs, we could finish the entire parsha with the 7 aliyahs, and the last oila, the Shvi, he could be the one to lane from the Navi. Me'ikra didn't we paskin that you're allowed to do that? And then you would say Kaddish. However, Kedei Lot says Gam Dasa Omer B'Gemara De'ein Mafter Oila L'Minyan Shiva. But in order to be Mekayim the Shita that holds that the Mafter cannot count towards one of the critical 7 aliyahs, because we have to make a distinction, because his laning from the psukim of the Chumash is really only l'chvayid HaTorah. It's not me'ikar adin, it's not part of the chiv of kriyas HaTorah. V'alkein me'anachaydhu, therefore it is proper, l'krai shiva kruyim, to first call up 7 aliyahs, kaidem shamaschel ha'maftir, before you go and call up the maftir and let the maftir begin. And in order to make it clear to everybody that the maftir is not part of the 7 main aliyahs, in order to make a clear distinction between the 7 aliyahs and the maftir, tiknu gamkein, there were also masakin sha'anochay lechatchila, that lechatchila the proper thing to do is lahafsik bahakadish, to make a hefsik by saying kaddish, bein kriyasai lekriya shar ha'olim, between the laning of the maftir and the laning of the other 7 aliyahs. Umemela, and now it comes out mukrik ligmar asedra metchila. So now that we're going to do this, now that we're going to have 7 aliyahs and then kaddish and then the maftir, one of the results of that is that we must finish the entire parsha between the first 7 aliyahs. Why? Because we can't put a kaddish before we finish the sedra, because the kaddish has to go on a davar shalom. The kaddish has to go on a complete laning. Now, the laning of the parsha of the week is not complete until we finish the parsha. And you're telling me you must have a kaddish between the first 7 aliyahs and the maftir. Well, that means that we have to finish the sedra from the first 7 aliyahs, so that it should be nigmar, it should be completed, and then we can have kaddish. Then the maftir is going to have to lane at least 3 psukim from the Torah, and those psukim will be pulled from Shvi, or if you made Hoysafas, and you have an 8th aliyah, 9th aliyah, 10th aliyah before maftir, so then the maftir is going to repeat some of the psukim that the last aliyah laid. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chaf, V'ligmar imayim parsha, we call them 7 aliyahs, and between those 7 aliyahs we complete the laning of the parsha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, like we learned before, remember, we said on Shabbos you're allowed to make haisafais. So the laning of the parsha might not be only 7 aliyahs, it might be 12 aliyahs. If there's a big simcha in shul, and you have to give the zaydis and the mechutanim and the brother-in-laws and everybody else, you might have 12 aliyahs. So then we'll finish the parsha amongst the 12 aliyahs. And then we'll say Kaddish between the laning of the Sedra of the week and the maftir, and then we'll call up the maftir. Acha ikar ashbi'inan, but the ikar point over here is the nahagu shaloi lahashlim b'hamaftir es aparsha v'achakach lo mekadosh. The main point that the Mechaber is trying to teach over here is that the parsha has to be completed before you call up the maftir. The parsha has to be completed, then you have to be mafsik with Kaddish, and then you call up the maftir, who is going to both have an aliyah lane from the Torah and then lane from the Navi. There has to be a distinction between everybody else and the maftir. Eloyarma Kaddish kain kriyas maftir. You always have to say Kaddish before the maftir. Umemela muchrach ligmar kol hasedra mitchila kaidam amiras Kaddish, and that's why you must finish the entire parsha before Kaddish, because the Kaddish has to go on the complete parsha. Ukamaisha kasavdu b'siv katan yutes. Okay. Now we go to the Ramah. Last word on the line, top line here, Samach Aleph and Beis. Hagah says to Ramah, v'chein nay hagim b'yomtiv. The same minig holds true on Yom Tov. She'ein maftir miminyan akruim. Remember, on Yom Tov, we're supposed to have 5 aliyahs, but we in fact don't have 5 aliyahs. We have 6 aliyahs. We have 5 aliyahs, and then Kaddish, and then maftir. Again, because the maftir who's going to have an aliyah lane from the Torah, or the Balkaira will lane from the Torah for his aliyah, and then he's going to lane from the Navi, he has to be separate and distinct from the other aliyahs. So we have 5 aliyahs, Kaddish, and then the maftir. So that's why the Ramah says, the maftir aliyah does not count towards the required number of aliyahs, towards the required 5 aliyahs. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Ramah wants to say over here is, Shagam b'yomtiv, also on yomtiv. After midina hayamuter hamafter liyos min aminyan chamisha. Really, like we said by Shabbos, may ikar adin we paskin that the mafter aliyah is allowed to be counted towards the required number of aliyahs. But then, just like on Shabbos, become mokaim naihagim gankein she'enam after min aminyan. The same way. On Shabbos, we call up an 8th aliyah from maftir, and we don't count the maftir towards the required 7 aliyahs. So to on Yom Tov, we call up a 6th aliyah from maftir, and we do not count the maftir towards the required number of 5 aliyahs on Yom Tov. Rather, on Yom Tov, what do? We call up a 6th aliyah. He's going to lay in the psukim to talk about the karbanos of that day. That's the chayvas hayom, the obligatory karbanos of that day. And we're going to say Kaddish before the maftir. Now, you're not going against the Shita in the Amoraim, who holds that the last aliyah can count, that the maftir can count towards the required number. In other words, we're saying, why do we call up an 8th aliyah on Shabbos and a 6th aliyah on Yom Tov? Because we want to be choishish for the man Damar who holds that the maftir cannot count towards the required number of aliyahs. Okay, by doing so, are we going keneged? Are we going opposite the shittas that hold that it can count towards the number? No. We're not going against their shita. Because most paiskim hold that you're allowed to make kaisafas on Yom Tov the same way you're allowed to make kaisafas on Shabbos. So there's no biggie that you have six aliyahs on Yom Tov instead of having 5. We saw yesterday that there are Manda Amrim who hold you're not allowed to make kaisafas on Yom Tov. Why? Because Yom Tov is supposed to have 5 aliyahs. You're making 6? Oh, that sounds like you're elevating Yom Tov to the status of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is 6 aliyahs. Oh, you're going to make 7 aliyahs on Yom Tov? Now it sounds like you're elevating Yom Tov to the status of Shabbos, right? But we don't paskin that way. We paskin like Roiv HaPaiskim, who hold that you are allowed to make kaisafas on Yom Tov. Since we paskin like them, all right, so you're calling up a 6th aliyah on Yom Tov. What's the problem? By doing so, you're being choishish for the shita that holds that the maftir doesn't count, and you're making a haisafa. No problem. Now, there's one thing that I do want to point out over here, a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. In Mishnah Berurah is Katan Yud Tes, we said that you need to finish the parsha and then say Kaddish. And the Mishnah Berurah, the words of the Mishnah Berurah, nice Katan Yud Tes, the Mishnah Berurah said, "Umemela muchrach ligmar hasedra mitchila." You must complete the parsha. Because you can't say Kaddish in the middle of the Kriya. The Kriya for a regular Shabbos is the Parsha. This week's Kriya is Parshas Chayesar. Now, you're not going to say Kaddish in between Shishi and Shvi. You're not going to say Kaddish in between Eliezer, Eved Avram, davening to Hashem with his whole plan of how he should pick out the girl for Yitzchak, and then when he goes to speak to Lavan and Besuel and tell them over the whole story, you're not going to be mafsik with a Kaddish smack in the middle of everything. The Kaddish has to come at the end of the Sedra. That's why the Mishnah Berurah said, we must finish the 7 required aliyahs. We must finish the entire Parsha between the required 7 aliyahs. Only then can we say Kaddish, and then we'll call up the maftir. But notice that on Yom Tov, it's a little bit different. On Yom Tov, we have the Yom Tov laning, whatever the Yom Tov laning happens to be. So let's say Shvi Shal Pesach. Shvi Shal Pesach, we lane the Shira Alayam. We lane Oz Yoshir, right? So we divide that up amongst 5 aliyahs. Then we say Kaddish, then we call up the maftir. What is the maftir lane? On a regular Shabbos, what is the maftir lane? He just repeats part of what the Baal Kairei already laned during Shvi. It's a repeat performance. It seems to be totally extra. So it's very clear on a regular Shabbos that the main 7 aliyahs, that's the Chayvas Hayom, that's the Kriyas HaTorah of that Shabbos, and then the Maftir, which comes after Kaddish, is a repeat performance. He's repeating psukim that were already laned, and then he's going to lane from the HaTorah. So we understand what's going on here. Why is he repeating those psukim? Because he has to lane from the Torah. Why? Because since he's going to lane from the Navi, we need him to lane from the Torah also, so it shouldn't look like the Navi is equal to the Torah. Fine, we get that. But Yom Tov is a little bit different. Yom Tov, the Maftir, is not a repeat performance. On Yom Tov, let's say Shvi Shal Pesach, I just gave the example, the 5 aliyahs are going to lane the laning of Shvi Shal Pesach. They're going to lane about the Shira Alayam. They're going to lane Oz Yashir. Then you're going to say Kaddish. Then you're going to call up the Maftir. The Maftir is not going to do a repeat. The Maftir is going to lane a new Kriya. He's going to lane from Parshas Pinchas. He's going to lane the psukim that describe the carbon musaf of Shvi Shal Pesach. So it's not a repeat performance. It's actually Choyvas Hayoim, which is what the Mishnah Berurah actually calls it. The Mishnah Berurah uses those words here. He says in Ois Katan Chaf Aleph, Elakayrei b'fnei atzmai b'parsha shel Choyvas Hayoim, v'hakadish oimer mikaydem. Yet, Kaddish is going to come before his laning. That's the point that I want to make here. On Shabbos, the Kaddish is coming after we completely finished the Chayvas Hayom. We laned Parshas Chayesara. We're done as far as Kriyas HaTorah goes. Now we're going to say Kaddish because we're done. Now the 8th Aliyah is going to lane a repeat performance from Shvi, just L'Kavod HaTorah, and then he's going to lane the Haftarah. But we understand that the Kaddish came before the Maftir because we understand that we already finished Kriyas HaTorah. On Yom Tov, it really isn't so much that way. Because on Yom Tov, yes, we finished laning the Shira Alayam. We finished laning Oz Yashir. But we didn't lane the Karban Musaf yet. So the Maftir is not just a repeat. It's not extraneous. He's the one that's laning the Chayvas Hayom. He's laning about the Karban Musaf. And yet the Kaddish comes before him. And the explanation of that is that we want the Kaddish to come before the Maftir. Because we need to have that distinction between the 5 required aliyahs and the 6th extra aliyah. We need to make that distinction. And we make that distinction by being mafsik with Kaddish. You're being mafsik in the middle of the Kriyas HaTorah of the Chayvas Hayom. That's okay. Why? Because this is not like laning between Shishi and Shvi. This is not that you didn't have a complete laning to say Kaddish on. You only had a partial laning. You interrupted with Kaddish and then you finished the laning. No. The 5 aliyahs that laned, let's say on Shvi Shal Pesach, the Shira Alayam, that is a complete laning in its own right. That's a Davar Shalom that you could say Kaddish over. Now, the next aliyah, the Maftir, that's going to lane the Karban Musaf, it's in a different Sefer Torah. It's in a different Parsha in the Chumash. It's in Parshas Pinchas. It's a totally different topic. So it's almost as if on a regular Shabbos you have one laning. Our laning this week is Parshas Chayesara. On Shabbos you have 2. On Yom Tov you have 2 lanings. You have the laning, so let's say the Shira Alayam, or on another Yom Tov, Aser to Aser, or on Shavuos, Kabbalas HaTorah. That's one laning. Then you have a second laning, which is the Karban Musaf, which is why it's in 2 different Sifrei Torah also. It's 2 different Sifrei Torah. So you say Kaddish after the completion of the first laning. Then you call up the Maftir, so you have a distinction between the 5 main aliyahs and the 6th aliyah. You lane the Maftir, and then you lane from the Navi. Okay. Now, continuing in the Ramah. So what we've established so far over here in the Mechaber is that generally speaking, we want to have this distinction between the Maftir and the main required aliyahs. Why? Because we are being choishish for the Shitas HaAmaroim that ein HaMaftir oila lahaminyan, that the Maftir aliyah cannot count towards the required aliyahs. But there's an interesting case. There are cases where the Maftir aliyah does count towards the required aliyahs. I'll give you an example. What happens on a Tainus Tzibur? A Tainus Tzibur that falls out on a Tuesday. right? Let's say Shiva Asa B'Tammuz falls out on a Tuesday. Okay, what do you lane by Shachris? You lane the laning of Vayachal, the laning of a Tainis Tzibur. How many aliyahs do you have for that? Only 3. You have 3 aliyahs. Now the third one, by Mincha, not by Shachris you don't have HaTorah, but by Mincha you have a HaTorah. Dirshu Hashem b'yimatzai, Kerubi Yisai Karev. Dirshu, Rabbi Yisai. Okay, so by Mincha, on a Tainis Tzibur, you call up 3 aliyahs, and the third aliyah is the maftir. The third aliyah is going to be the one who's going to lane from the HaTorah, or the Baal Korah is going to lane, he's going to make the brachas on the HaTorah, and the Baal Korah is going to lane. How many aliyahs do you need during the week? 3. So on a Tainis Tzibur by Mincha, the maftir is Oila Lahaminyan. And that's what the Ramah says here. Hago. We did this at the beginning. Second line down, middle of the line. Aval b'choil. But during the week, sha'aser lahaisif aminyan akruim. During the week, you're not allowed to make haisafis. The reason you're not allowed to make haisafis during the week is mishum bittul malacha. People have to go to work. There's no time during the week to make haisafis. So we don't let you make haisafis during the week. You're not allowed to. Aval b'choil sha'aser lahaisif aminyan akruim. During the week, you're not allowed to call up extra aliyahs. Hashlishi hu hamaftir. So now the shlishi, the third aliyah, is going to be the maftir, and the maftir is going to be oila lahaminyan. He's going to count towards the required number of aliyahs. Continues the Rama. Uviyayim shameitzian shnei sfarim oy shloisha. Days when you take out 2 sifrei Torah, or when you take out 3 sifrei Torah. Hamaftir kairei ba'achroina. The maftir is always the one who lanes from the last Sefer Torah, and he always comes after Kaddish. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chav Beis, Ois Shloisha. When do you take out 3 Sifrei Torah? Kigoin, for example, Rosh Chodesh Tevis Shechal B'Shabbos. We know that Chanukah always has Rosh Chodesh in it, right? Chanukah starts on Chaf Hei Kislev, 25th day of Kislev. Chanukah is 8 days long, so it's always going to include Rosh Chodesh. It's also always going to include a Shabbos, because it's 8 days. It's always going to include a Shabbos. What happens when Rosh Chodesh Teves, the month after Kislev, falls out on Shabbos? So now it's Shabbos, Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh. So then you have 3 aliyahs, 3 Sifrei Torah. Shetzarch Likrois Parshas HaShavua. You have 1 Sefer Torah for the Parsha of the week. Parshas Rosh Chodesh. You have a 2nd Sefer Torah to lane the laning of Rosh Chodesh, the Inyan Shel Chanukah, and then you have a 3rd Sefer Torah to lane from the Nesiim, to lane from the Karbonos that the Nesiim brought during the Chanukah Sabayis on the Mishkan. B'Simchas Torah, or on Simchas Torah, you always take out 3 Sifrei Torah. Shetzarek Likrois Parshas V'Zos HaBracha in the first one. Bereshis, you're going to lane Bereshis in the 2nd Sefer, Parshas HaMusafim, and then the Maftir is going to lane the Psukim that describe the Carbon Musaf of Shmini Atzeres. Bechol Zeh, in all of these cases, HaMaftir Bilvad Kairei Ba'achroina. The Maftir is isolated to the last Sefer Torah. That's when you're going to do. You're going to call up the Maftir by the last Sefer Torah. He's going to lane the Carbon Musaf, and then he's going to read from the Navi. Uben kisham ashlimin aminyan oisha meisifin al aminyan hakoil oilin b'shtei svarim harishonim. Everything else, if you're making hoisafis, if you're not making hoisafis, everything else has to happen from the first 2 Sifrei Torah. Only the maftir could be in the last Sefer Torah, and there has to be a kaddish before him. Okay, continues the Ramah here, 3rd line down near the end of the line, an interesting chiddush. The katan yachal likrais b'parshas hamusafin. The Ramah paskins that a katan, a minor, could lane the musaf. You could call up a katan for the maftir, and he could lane the musaf. Oy ba'arba parshas shemesifin ba'adar, or parshas shkolim, parshas zachar, parshas para, parshas hachodesh. You could call up a katan for these aliyahs, and he could lane. He could lane the laning of the arba parshias. And the Ramah says, and indeed that's the minig. Even though there are those that disagree with this. And the Ramah continues and he says, and always the golden rule is v'oimrim kaddish kaidem she'oile hamaftir. You always have kaddish before the maftir. And again, like we've already said, like the Mechaber himself said, that there's no difference if you're making Hoysafis or you're not making Hoysafis, Ubein Moitzian Sefer Torah Echad or Shloisha, you're always going to have that the main aliyas, including the Hoysafis, are always going to come before the maftir and before the Kaddish. And then after that, you're going to have the maftir isolated on his own to show that there's a difference between him and the other aliyas, to be choshish for the man Yamar who holds ein hamaftir oila min haminyan. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Now, the Ramah said you could call up a cotton to lane from the Arba Parshias. Now, one of the Arba Parshias is Parsha Zachar. Now, in most shuls, when it comes time for Parsha Zachar, the Gabbai gives a clap, and the Gabbai says everyone should have in mind to listen to the Kriya and to be Yoitza, the mitzvah of Zechiras Maisei Amalek. Why is it so critical? Because we paskin that, I think we paskin that way. I have to be very careful what I say. I don't want to chas v'shalom be over on Megal Panim B'Torah Shaloik Halacha. I think we paskin Halacha L'Maisa. We consider Parsha Zachar to be a daraisa. So that's why we're so concerned with it. Make sure you have in mind to be yotzid mitzvah say daraisa, right? So we want to be very careful. Now it's very interesting. We're saying that Parsha Zachar is a daraisa, and yet we're saying that you could call up a cotton for Parsha Zachar, and a cotton could actually lane the kriya of Parsha Zachar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'aval pisha Parsha Zachar hichayvim in HaTorah sheyashmiana kol adam Yisrael." Even though Parsha Zachar is a daraisa that everyone should listen to it, v'hakatan she'ena b'chuyev b'davar ena yakal loitziam yidei chayva. We know the golden rule is you can only be mitzi somebody in a mitzvah if the two of you have the same level of obligation. If the chiyuv of Kiddush, Shabbos by day, it's a derabanan. So okay, so then if it's a chiyuv derabanan for me, it's a chiyuv derabanan for you. I can be mitzi you, you can be mitzi me. But if one person has a chiyuv daraisa and one person has a chiyuv derabanan, they can't be mitzi each other. So a cotton, let's say you're talking about a daraisa, Kiddush Friday night. The cotton's chiyuv is only a chiyuv of chinuch. That's the Rabbanon. Your level of chiyuv is a daraisa. So a cotton can't be mitzi you. Over here we have the same problem. If Parsha Zachar is a daraisa, then everybody has to hear the laning of Parsha Zachar, and the cotton who's laning, for him it's only the Rabbanon. How could he be mitzi people? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mikamakim, nevertheless, Hari Akshav Ashir Tzibur Kairei. Calm down. Even though the Ramah says that the cotton is allowed to lane it, says the Mishnah Berurah, look, nowadays, the cotton's not laning. Nowadays, the Baal Kairei lanes. The one who gets the Aliyah doesn't lane. The Baal Kairei lanes. So says the Mishnah Berurah, become Akam reaction of a Shech Tzibur Kairei. Umashmiel Tzibur Amoitzim Yidei Chayvasim. The cotton who's getting the Aliyah is not doing the laning. An adult Baal Kairei is doing the laning. But V'yesh Bachmir Medavar Shaloi L'Kreise L'Cotton L'Parsha Zachar. But there are those that are makbid and say, do not call up a cotton for Parsha Zachar. V'chein L'Parshas Parah. Likewise, don't call up a cotton for Parshas Parah. Sheyesh Oimrim Shekam Hi B'Daraisa, because there are those that say the Parshas Parah is also a daraisa. V'chein Hiskim Be'el Yerabah V'Derech HaChaim. U'b'yom Rishon Shel Shavuos, on the first day of Shavuos, Shekaren HaMerkava L'Mafter. The laning in the Navi on the first day of Shavuos is the Meiser Merkava. It's talking about everything that goes on in Shemayim with the Malachim and the Srafim and the Afani HaKodesh, etc., etc. This is esoteric. These are esoteric topics that are way beyond our pay grade. V'chein b'shvi shel Pesach shekarin Ashira. Also on Shvi shel Pesach, where we lane as Yashir, where we lane for the maftir. Interesting. V'chein b'shvi shel Pesach shekarin Hashira. So that would be, I think, Shiras Devara, I think. Or B'Shabbos Shuva, right? The maftir on Shvi Shel Pesach is Shiras Devara? Question mark. 1 second. Bear with me. Shavuos Pesach. Yom Shvi. No, I'm sorry. It's Shiras David. Shvi Shel Pesach. Yeah. I think Parshas B'Shalach is Shiras Devora, but Yom Shvi Shel Pesach is Shiras David from Shmuel Beis. Vayedaber David LaHashem es divrei Ashira hazois b'yom hitzal Hashem Yisai mikaf kol oivov umikaf shol. So it's Shiras David, not Shiras Dvarah. So v'chein b'shviyah shal Pesach shekeren Ashira u'b'Shabbos Shuva, also on Shabbos Shuva. Gam kein noihagin she'ein karen oisel lechatchila lamaftir. We don't call up a cotton from after. U'b'tshuvas parak shoshon hela le'ikar da cotton lo yikra barba parshios. The Tshuvas Parach Shoshon, I don't know who that is, but he's brought down here by the Chavetz Chaim. The Tshuvas Parach Shoshon says that we should not call up a cotton for any of the Arba Parshios. Ve'aviyah b'chadusha Rabbi Kiva Eger, and Rabbi Kiva Eger brings this down. V'amnam gam b'sharm after gam ken dafka b'cotton she'gil l'chinish she'yedei alachta chayis yais b'toif. The Chavetz Chaim says for any mafter, we shouldn't call up a cotton unless he's an older one who is higil l'chinuch, and he has clear enunciation. He knows how to enunciate every vowel and every letter clearly. Not like those kehillas where they call up little children to learn the HaTorah, and they don't read it clearly, and people aren't yotzeh. V'ayin bebir halacha. Ois katan chav dalid. The Ramah said that we are noyig to call up ketanim afal pi sheyesh cholkim hainu da cholkim sfir lehu dafka b'shabbos shekara mafta b'ashek kfar kara shvi oz nucha likrei lekatan. These people who argue and they say that we cannot call up a cotton for the Arba Parshios, and we can't call them up on Yom Tov when the mafter lanes the psukim of the Karban Musaf. What do they hold? They hold that to call up a cotton for mafter on a regular Shabbos, that's no biggie, because on a regular Shabbos, the mafter is only a repeat performance. The psukim that he's laning from the Torah were already read by the seventh Aliyah, by the Shvi. But on Yom Tov, like I said earlier, on Yom Tov, the mafter is laning the Karban Musaf. That's not a repeat performance. By the Arba Parshios, Parsha Zachar, he's laning Parsha Zachar. It's not a repeat performance. So on those Shabbos, these Man Yomrim hold you cannot call up a cotton. You can't call them up. And then you say Kaddish before the maftir. After we complete the regular Kriyas HaTorah, then we say Kaddish. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah is not being mechadish anything over here that we haven't already heard from the mechaber. Rak lashpiyinu mashisim lebesayf to ein chiluk el b'chal pam amar mechadish kedem hamafter dafka. The chiddush is what comes now. Eis katan chavav kedem she'olah hamafter. The chiddush is that the Ramah just wants to stress that on days when we take out 3 Sefer Torah or 2 Sifrei Torah, the mafter is always isolated to the last Sefer Torah. And the only one who's going to lane and be called up for an aliyah to the last Sefer Torah is the mafter. And that's always going to be after Kaddish. But during the week, again, Shabbos, Tainus Tzibur Mincha, during the week, you're not going to have Kaddish before the mafter. Because Tainus Tzibur Mincha, you're going to say Kaddish after the 3 aliyahs. You can't say Kaddish after 2 aliyahs. It's not a davar shalom. You didn't finish Kriyas HaTorah yet. So the Kaddish has to be after the 3rd aliyah, even though the 3rd aliyah is the mafter. During the week, when the mafter is one of the 3 required aliyahs, Amrim Kaddish Achar mafter. That's a case where you're going to say Kaddish after the mafter. I don't know what that means. We don't say Kaddish after you put the Sefer Torah away. We say Kaddish after the laning is over, before you put the Sefer Torah away. I was puzzled about this line when I prepared, and I forgot to look into it. Let me just see if I could see something quickly over here. I don't understand what that means. Oh, okay, I'm making a mistake. let's remember, when you have mincha by a tainis tzibur and you have laning, there's no chatzi kaddish after the laning. There's only chatzi kaddish after laning, right? There's no chatzi kaddish after that laning, right? Do I have a sitter over here? I don't have a regular. I'm stepping away from the camera for 1 second. Hi, I'm back. Right? There's no chatzi kaddish. Tainis tzibur. Tainis tzibur. Right, there's no chatzi kaddish. There's no chatzi kaddish after that laning. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah means here. The Mishnah Berurah means over here, he says, Aval b'choil. So this is again, Mishnah Berurah is Katan Chavav. The Kaddish always comes before the Maftir. That's on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Aval b'choil, but during the week, again, like Mincha v'Tainis Tzibur. Shahamaftir miminyan akruim, where the Maftir is the Shlishi, the Maftir is the third Aliyah, so the Maftir is counting towards the required 3 Aliyahs. Oimrim Kaddish achar hamaftir, you're going to say Kaddish after the Maftir. Dahainu achar shemachnisan ha-Sefer Torah lehechel, after you put the Sefer Torah away. Because what happens by Mincha and Tainis Tzibur, Rabbi say? You start off with Ashrei. After Ashrei, you say Chatzi Kaddish. After the Chatzi Kaddish, after Ashrei, you take out the Sefer Torah. You call up 3 Aliyahs. The Shlishi is the Maftir. So the Shlishi lanes his Aliyah. Right after that, you take out the Navi, you make the brachas on the HaTorah, and you lay in the HaTorah. Then you do Hag B'Galila. Then you put the Sefer Torah away. You put the Sefer Torah in the Aron Kodesh. Then you have a Chatzi Kaddish, and then you have Shmoneh Esrei. So that's what he means over here. By Mincha and Tainis Tzibur, the Kaddish is after the Maftir, and it's after you put the Sefer Torah away. V'loi koidem. There ain't oimrim kaddish ad shenishlam haminyan, because when else are you going to say kaddish? You can't say kaddish between sheni and shlishi because you didn't finish the 3 required aliyahs. You don't have a davar shalem. You didn't finish kriyas HaTorah to be able to say kaddish, so you can't say the kaddish. Then you're not going to say the kaddish between the aliyah of the shlishi and the laning of shlishi and the haftarah, because the haftarah is part of the 3rd aliyah. It's part of the maftir. So you say the Kaddish after you put the Sefer Torah away, right before Shmoneh Esrei. Ubechalamayid Pesach, on Chalamayid Pesach, v'chein b'chalamayid Sukkos. Now you're going to have 4 aliyahs because it's Chalamayid. Oimrim Kaddish achar shekara haravi. You're going to say Kaddish after the 4th aliyah. Does kfar nishla minyan akruim, which is after you reached the required number of aliyahs. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discuss of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshua Seferos Panas and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the B'Yisrael Tzedek B'Meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.